In the heart of London, the golden lights of Buckingham Palace shimmered against the evening sky. The city seemed calm, but inside the palace, the air was thick with tension. Queen Camilla had spent the day reviewing papers, attending brief meetings, and ensuring every royal appointment was properly scheduled. Yet, something felt different that evening. There was an unusual energy in the halls, one that even the most seasoned staff could sense. Among those walking the marble corridors was Thomas Reed, a young royal guard. Thomas had recently joined the palace's elite security team, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished, and his posture perfect. He had been trained to notice the smallest details, from a misplaced painting to a subtle shift in a person's expression. Today, however, Thomas noticed something more than the usual royal routine as he moved past the grand portraits lining the hallway. His eyes lingered on a portrait of Princess Diana. It had been years since her passing, yet her image remained a powerful presence in the palace. Thomas had heard countless stories about Diana, tales of her kindness, charm, and how she had touched lives around the world. But he also knew that within the palace walls, there were secrets, whispers that were never spoken aloud. That evening, Thomas had been assigned to a special task. He was to escort a confidential package to a private meeting in one of the palace's smaller chambers. The package contained documents related to historical royal matters, sensitive enough that only a few trusted individuals were allowed to handle them. Thomas walked steadily, careful not to make a sound on the polished floors. As he reached the chamber, he found Queen Camilla waiting. She was seated gracefully, her hands folded over a small stack of papers. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed a hint of concern. She looked up as Thomas entered. "Good evening, Thomas," she said softly. Her voice was polite but firm, carrying the weight of her authority. "Thank you for delivering this. Please place it on the table." Thomas nodded and placed the package carefully. As he did, he noticed a faint tremor in the Queen's hand. It was barely visible, but to someone trained like Thomas, it was significant. He knew that behind the composed exterior, there were worries that few could see. "Is everything all right, Your Majesty?" Thomas asked respectfully. Queen Camilla paused for a moment, her gaze shifting to the portrait of Diana across the room. "There are matters from the past," she said finally, her voice quiet. "Matters that some believe should never be discussed." Thomas stood silently, sensing that the Queen was inviting him to listen, but not necessarily to respond. There was a weight in her words, a hint of mystery that made him curious. For weeks, Thomas had been hearing unusual conversations among the palace staff. Whispers about old letters, secret meetings, and events that were never publicly acknowledged. It seemed as though someone wanted the truth to remain hidden. Thomas had always been loyal, believing that some things were not meant for the public. But there was a part of him that wondered if the truth could bring clarity instead of chaos. As he observed Queen Camilla, Thomas realized that she carried her own burdens. Her role as queen was challenging, filled with responsibilities that extended far beyond public appearances. She had to manage the royal family, diplomatic matters, and the expectations of millions. Yet, Thomas sensed that tonight, there was a personal challenge weighing on her as well. Suddenly, the quiet of the room was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. A staff member entered, holding a folder. Queen Camilla glanced at it and nodded. The staff member left as quickly as they had appeared, leaving the Queen and Thomas alone once more. Thomas shifted slightly, unsure if he should remain standing or take a step back. The silence was heavy, yet it was filled with unspoken words. Finally, Queen Camilla spoke again. "Thomas, you are young, but you are observant," she said. "You notice what others might miss. That is why I have allowed you to be here tonight. There are truths in this palace, stories that have been kept away from the world. Stories about people who have shaped history, who have touched lives in ways many cannot imagine. Thomas listened intently, feeling a mix of respect and anticipation. He had always admired the royal family from a distance, but now he was in a position that few gods ever experienced. He realized that he might witness something extraordinary, something that would change his understanding of the palace forever. The queen's gaze returned to the portrait of Diana. She was admired, loved, and remembered by millions. Yet, not all stories about her are told. Some are hidden, protected by walls of silence. Her voice softened, and for a moment, she seemed vulnerable, almost human in a way that few had seen. Thomas remained silent, unsure if he should speak. He felt the weight of the moment, knowing that whatever came next would require discretion and courage. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the hallway, a subtle shift, as if someone was approaching. Thomas's training kicked in instantly. He straightened, alert but composed. Queen Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression unreadable. The door opened and another royal guard stepped in. He was older than Thomas, with a seasoned presence and careful movements. He nodded respectfully to the queen and then glanced at Thomas. There was a silent acknowledgement, an understanding of the hierarchy and protocol within the palace. "You may leave for now," Queen Camilla said to Thomas, her tone polite but firm. "There will be other duties for you later. But remember what you have seen here tonight. Some knowledge carries responsibility." Thomas bowed slightly, feeling a mixture of pride and curiosity. He had been part of the royal household for only a short time, yet already he had glimpsed the complexities behind the palace doors. He knew that his life as a guard was about to change, in ways he could not yet predict. As he walked back down the hallway, Thomas's mind raced. Questions filled his thoughts. What were the secrets Queen Camilla referred to? Why was Diana's portrait given such prominence in this moment? And why had he been chosen to witness even a small part of this hidden story? The palace felt different as he moved through it. The familiar corridors seemed longer, the shadows deeper, and the portraits more meaningful. Thomas understood that he had stepped into a world where appearances could be deceiving, and where loyalty and courage were tested in ways that went beyond protocol. By the time Thomas reached the guard station, he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He knew that his journey had just begun. There were truths to uncover, mysteries to solve, and a story that demanded careful attention. Thomas realized that he had become part of something much larger than himself, something that could change the way he saw history and the people who shaped it. That night, as he rested in his quarters, Thomas thought about the Queen's words. He understood that trust was fragile and that some knowledge came with risks. Yet, he also felt a sense of purpose. He was no longer just a guard. He was a witness to secrets that had been hidden for years. And deep inside, Thomas knew that one day, the truth he carried might reveal itself in ways that no one could have imagined. Outside, London's streets were quiet, illuminated by streetlights and the gentle glow of the city at night. Inside Buckingham Palace, history lingered in every corner, in every painting, and in every whispered conversation. And in that quiet, Thomas felt the weight of his responsibility, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He did not yet know what awaited him. But one thing was certain. The palace was full of stories, and he was about to uncover one of the most remarkable of all. The next morning, Buckingham Palace was alive with activity. Courtiers, staff, and guards moved through the hallways with purpose, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble floors. Thomas arrived early, as usual, and took his position near one of the main entrances. His mind, however, was still full of questions from the night before. Queen Camilla's words lingered in his thoughts. She had hinted at secrets that few could even imagine, and Thomas wondered how much of it he might be allowed to see. As he stood at attention, he noticed a figure approaching down the corridor. It was Robert Hall, one of the senior royal guards. Robert had served the palace for decades and was known for his strict discipline and unwavering loyalty. Thomas had always respected him, though Robert's stern demeanor could be intimidating. "Good morning, Thomas," Robert said, his voice calm but carrying a subtle authority. "I need to speak with you privately. Follow me." Thomas nodded and followed Robert down a quieter hallway that led to a smaller chamber near the palace gardens. The walls were lined with photographs of past monarchs, each capturing a moment in history. Robert motioned for Thomas to sit, and he himself took a seat across from him. "You have a curious mind, Thomas," Robert began. "You notice details that others overlook. That is why I want to talk to you. What happened last night with the Queen was unusual. Very unusual." Thomas listened intently. He had expected a lecture or instructions, but instead, Robert seemed ready to share something. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Thomas, there are things about the royal family that are not for the public. Things that are sensitive," Robert continued. "Some involve events from many years ago. Events that changed the lives of people we all admired." Thomas felt a shiver of anticipation. He knew Robert's words were deliberate, measured. Every sentence seemed to carry weight. "Are you referring to Princess Diana?" Thomas asked cautiously. Robert's eyes flickered toward the window, as if making sure no one was listening. "Yes, Thomas. Diana was special, loved by millions. But within these walls, there are stories that no one speaks about openly. Stories that could surprise you." Thomas's curiosity grew stronger. He had always admired Diana's kindness and courage. To think there were hidden truths about her life and her passing was both intriguing and unsettling. "Why are you telling me this?" Thomas asked. Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because, Thomas, you are different from the others. You are loyal, yes, but you are also honest and observant. Sometimes people like you are needed to witness the truth. And tonight something important will happen that you must see." Thomas nodded, unsure what Robert meant, but trusting him. He had learned quickly that within the palace, trust and discretion were valued above all else. Later that day, Thomas returned to his regular duties, but his mind was elsewhere. He could not stop thinking about Robert's words. The palace seemed alive with secrets, and he felt as though he was standing on the edge of something extraordinary. As evening approached, Thomas was summoned once more. This time, he was asked to accompany Robert to one of the inner chambers of the palace. The hallways were quieter now, the sounds of daily activity replaced by the soft hum of anticipation. When they arrived, Queen Camilla was already there, seated at a large table with a few confidential documents spread before her. Her expression was calm, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that Thomas had not seen before. She looked up as Robert and Thomas entered. "Thank you for coming," she said to Thomas. "Robert has spoken highly of your attention and discretion. Tonight you will witness something that is not usually shared. It is important that you remain calm and respectful." Thomas nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He knew that what he was about to see could change his understanding of the royal family forever. Queen Camilla stood and walked to a large cabinet at the side of the room. She opened it carefully, revealing a collection of old letters and documents. Some were bound in leather, others in plain folders. She selected one folder and handed it to Robert. "This contains information that has been kept private for many years," she explained. "It relates to events surrounding Diana. Some truths have been misunderstood or forgotten. It is time for certain details to be acknowledged." Robert took the folder and opened it gently, his hand steady despite the weight of what it contained. Thomas observed quietly, his eyes moving from the Queen to Robert, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Thomas," Robert said softly, "what you are about to hear is true, but it is delicate. You must understand that not all information is meant for public knowledge. Some things remain within these walls for a reason. Still, it is important to remember that Diana's memory is honored by truth, not rumors. Thomas nodded solemnly, ready to listen. Robert began to speak, recounting events from years ago. He told of moments when Diana had expressed concerns about her safety and how certain precautions had been taken to protect her. He spoke of conversations between the royal family and their advisors, and the care taken to ensure that misunderstandings were avoided. As Thomas listened, he realized that much of what he had heard outside the palace, the gossip, the speculation, was incomplete. There was a level of thoughtfulness and caution within the palace that few outsiders could imagine. Diana's life, her choices, and the challenges she faced were far more complex than the headlines had ever shown. Queen Camilla watched Thomas carefully, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and caution. She seemed to be assessing his reactions, making sure he understood the importance of discretion. After a long while, Robert closed the folder and looked at Thomas. "This is only a part of the story," he said. "But it shows that Diana's life and the events surrounding her were handled with care and consideration. There were challenges, yes, but there was also loyalty and respect. It is a truth that should be remembered." Thomas felt a deep sense of understanding. He realized that the palace was more than just a place of tradition and ceremony. It was a place where difficult decisions were made, where people worked quietly to protect one another, and where history was preserved with care. As the evening drew to a close, Queen Camilla spoke again. "Thomas, tonight you have witnessed a glimpse of history and responsibility. Remember what you have learned. Some truths are delicate, and they must be handled with respect. But they are part of the legacy we carry forward." Thomas bowed respectfully. He felt honored to have been included in this private moment, and he understood the trust that had been placed in him. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was also inspiring. Later, as he returned to his quarters, Thomas thought about what he had seen and heard. He understood that the world outside the palace often misunderstood the royal family, and that appearances could be deceiving. Loyalty, care, and discretion were the foundation of the palace's work, and he was now part of that tradition. That night, as Thomas prepared for rest, he reflected on the importance of truth and trust. He knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more secrets to uncover, and more responsibilities to bear. But he also felt a quiet confidence. He was no longer just a guard. He was a witness, a keeper of knowledge, and someone who could honor the memory of those who had shaped the royal family. Outside, London slept peacefully, unaware of the stories unfolding within Buckingham Palace. Inside, history lingered in the halls, in the documents, and in the quiet moments shared between those entrusted with the truth. Thomas understood that he had become part of something larger than himself, and that the journey had only just begun. The following morning, Buckingham Palace was filled with its usual rhythm. Courtiers and staff moved swiftly through the halls, attending to their duties. Thomas stood at his post near the palace entrance, his thoughts still lingering on the previous evening. The conversation with Robert and Queen Camilla had left him both curious and cautious. He understood that the palace held stories that were not meant for the public, and that some truths were delicate. Yet, there was a part of him that wanted to learn more. As Thomas adjusted his uniform, he noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was Captain Harrison, one of the senior guards, known for his strict approach to protocol. Unlike Robert, Harrison had a reputation for being uncompromising and rigid. Thomas straightened immediately, sensing that something unusual was about to occur. "Thomas, come with me," Harrison said, his tone firm. He led Thomas through a series of hallways that were quieter than usual. The palace seemed different this morning, almost tense. Thomas felt a strange anticipation, as if the walls themselves were aware that a significant moment was near. They reached a private chamber that Thomas had never entered before. The room was modest compared to the grand halls he was used to, but there was a sense of history in the air. Photographs of past royal events lined the walls, and a single window allowed sunlight to spill across the polished floor. Harrison turned to Thomas, his expression serious. "You have been given a glimpse of the palace's history. That is not common for someone of your position. But now, there is a matter that requires your attention." Thomas nodded, trying to remain composed. He had learned that within the palace, every word and gesture mattered. The guards followed strict rules, and yet sometimes those rules intersected with moments of extraordinary responsibility. "Captain Harrison," Thomas said respectfully, "what is this matter?" Harrison glanced toward the door, then spoke in a quieter tone. "There are guards who believe that certain stories are dangerous to share. Some do not trust outsiders or even younger members of the team. You must understand that within the palace, loyalty is tested in subtle ways." Thomas listened carefully, sensing that Harrison was preparing him for something important. "Today, you will witness a situation involving another guard," Harrison continued. "It is unusual, and it may appear harsh, but it is a test of judgment, understanding, and patience. You must remain calm and observe." Thomas's heart quickened. He had always trained for emergencies, but this was different. This was not about protocol or routine. It was about understanding human behavior, history, and the delicate balance within the palace. A few moments later, the door opened, and another guard entered the room. His name was Gregory, a veteran of the Royal Guard who had served for many years. Gregory's reputation was impeccable, but he had recently been involved in disagreements regarding sensitive information. Thomas noticed a tension in the air immediately. Gregory's eyes met Harrison's, and there was a brief moment of silent communication. Then Harrison spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Gregory, it has come to my attention that you have been sharing opinions that may not reflect the full truth of the palace's history. This is a serious matter." Gregory's posture stiffened. "Captain, I only speak from what I have seen and experienced," he said, his tone measured but confident. Harrison nodded slowly. "I understand, but there are limits to what can be shared. Some knowledge is sensitive and must remain within certain walls. The Queen has entrusted us with discretion, and it is your duty to respect that." Thomas observed silently, sensing that the situation was about to escalate in an unusual way. He realized that the rules of the palace were not just about uniforms or schedules. They were about trust, loyalty, and the careful handling of truth. Suddenly, Gregory spoke in a softer voice, almost a whisper. "Captain, there is a part of history that has been hidden for too long. It involves Diana and the events surrounding her departure from public life. The truth has been overlooked, misunderstood, or ignored. People deserve to know, even if the palace has kept it private." Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not respond immediately. There was a pause in the room, filled with unspoken tension. Thomas felt the weight of the moment. This was not just a disagreement between guards. It was a confrontation about history, responsibility, and the handling of sensitive truth. "Gregory," Harrison said finally, "the palace has handled these matters carefully. The Queen and senior advisors have made decisions based on what is best for the family and the public. It is not your place to question those decisions in this manner." Gregory looked down for a moment, then met Harrison's eyes steadily. "I understand my duty, Captain, but I also have a responsibility to honor what really happened. Diana's story is more than just what is seen in public. There are truths that, if told carefully, can help people understand, remember, and respect her life." Thomas felt a sense of admiration for Gregory. It was rare to see such courage, especially when it meant challenging someone senior while still respecting the rules. He realized that the palace was full of layers protocol, tradition, loyalty, and personal conviction all intertwined. Harrison took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "You may speak, but only here, and only to those who are authorized to hear. This is not a matter for gossip or public discussion. It is a matter of truth, and truth must be handled responsibly." Gregory nodded and opened a small folder he had brought with him. Inside were notes, letters, and carefully written recollections from those who had worked closely with Diana. Thomas watched as Gregory began to explain events that were never publicly documented. Stories about Diana's kindness, her careful planning for charitable work, and the challenges she faced within the royal household. As Gregory spoke, Thomas realized how little he had known about the complexities of life inside the palace. Diana had been admired, yes, but there were layers of responsibility, expectation, and caution that shaped her daily life. Her decisions were thoughtful and deliberate, and she had been surrounded by people who wanted to protect her while also maintaining royal protocol. Queen Camilla entered the room quietly, observing the exchange. She did not interrupt, but her presence added a sense of importance to the moment. Thomas noticed a calm authority in her demeanor. She seemed to trust that the discussion would be handled with respect and discretion. Gregory's voice remained steady as he recounted how certain events had been managed to ensure safety, understanding, and dignity. Thomas could see the care in every word. He understood that the truth was not always simple, and that revealing it required thoughtfulness and empathy. After a long discussion, Harrison closed his eyes for a moment and then spoke. "You have shown responsibility, Gregory, and you have reminded us all why discretion is vital." Thomas observed this. The palace functions not just through rules, but through the careful handling of trust and truth. Thomas felt a deep sense of respect for everyone in the room. He understood that the confrontation had not been about conflict, but about careful balance. Gregory had expressed his perspective, Harrison had ensured order, and Queen Camilla had allowed the truth to be shared responsibly. As the meeting ended, Harrison turned to Thomas. "Remember, what you have witnessed today is rare. It is a reminder that history is delicate, and that those who serve it must do so with integrity and respect." Thomas nodded, his mind filled with reflections. He realized that the palace was more than a residence or a symbol. It was a living institution where history, duty, and care intertwined. Every decision, every word, every action had consequences. And understanding those layers required patience and discernment. That evening, as Thomas returned to his quarters, he thought about Diana's life and the care taken to preserve her memory. He understood now that the palace was not simply about appearances or ceremony. It was about trust, history, and the careful preservation of truth. Outside, London's streets were calm, but inside Buckingham Palace, history was alive. Secrets were shared, lessons were learned, and Thomas felt a growing sense of purpose. He was no longer just a guard. He was a witness, a keeper of knowledge, and someone who would carry the responsibility of understanding and honoring the truth. As he prepared for the night, Thomas knew that there were more stories to uncover. The palace held mysteries that were waiting to be revealed, carefully and respectfully, and he felt ready for the journey ahead, knowing that each moment of observation, each conversation, and each careful step would bring him closer to understanding the full story of those who had shaped the royal family. The next day at Buckingham Palace was unusually quiet. The corridors, normally filled with the sounds of footsteps and quiet conversation, seemed almost hushed. Thomas moved through the hallways, carrying out his duties with precision, yet his mind was focused on the events of the previous days. The conversations with Robert, Gregory, and Queen Camilla had left him thoughtful. He understood that the palace was a place where history was preserved carefully, and where truths were often layered beneath appearances. As he passed the grand portraits along the main hall, his eyes paused on Diana's painting. There was something in her expression that always drew his attention. It was not only the warmth of her smile, but also the sense of determination in her eyes. Thomas often wondered what it had been like to know her personally, to see her kindness in action within the palace. He felt a growing respect for the way she had handled her responsibilities, even under immense public attention. Thomas had been instructed to assist with preparations for a private gathering later in the day. The Queen would be meeting with a small group of advisors and trusted staff to discuss matters of historical records. As Thomas arranged papers and helped organize the room, he could feel a sense of anticipation in the air. There was more to this gathering than a simple meeting. He could sense that something important was about to be revealed soon. Queen Camilla entered the room, her presence commanding attention. She moved gracefully, yet there was a subtle intensity in her eyes. Thomas watched as she greeted each person, her words polite and measured. When she reached Thomas, she nodded slightly, acknowledging his efforts. "Thank you for your help, Thomas," she said softly. "Your attention to detail ensures that everything runs smoothly." Thomas bowed slightly. "It is an honor to assist your Majesty," he replied. The Queen turned to the group, and her voice became calm but firm. "We are gathered today to discuss certain historical matters that require careful attention. Some details have remained private for decades, and it is time to address them responsibly." Thomas listened attentively, noting the seriousness of her tone. He understood that whatever was about to be shared carried great significance. The Queen motioned for Gregory to come forward. Gregory approached the table, carrying a small, well-worn folder. He looked around the room, then spoke in a clear voice. "What I will share today is part of the story of Princess Diana. These are documents, letters, and recollections that have been preserved over the years. They show not only her life within the palace, but also the care taken by those who served to protect her." Thomas leaned forward slightly, eager to absorb every detail. He had learned that Diana's story, as the public knew it, was only a fraction of what had truly happened. The documents in Gregory's folder promised a deeper understanding, one that required patience and thoughtfulness to comprehend. As Gregory began to explain, Thomas noticed the care in his words. He spoke about Diana's charitable work, the careful planning of her public appearances, and the guidance she received from senior staff. Each anecdote revealed a side of Diana that Thomas had never seen in the news. She was not only graceful and kind, but also thoughtful and strategic, handling challenges with intelligence and care. Queen Camilla listened quietly, her eyes focused on the folder. There was a mixture of pride and concern in her expression. She seemed to understand the importance of allowing these stories to be remembered accurately, while also ensuring that sensitive information remained protected. Thomas could feel the tension in the room shift. The focus was no longer on protocol or procedure, but on understanding history through the perspective of those who had lived it. The documents revealed decisions that had been made to ensure Diana's well-being, moments of foresight, and careful planning that had kept her safe and respected. Gregory paused for a moment, then continued. "These details are rarely discussed publicly, but they are part of her legacy. Diana faced challenges, yes, but she also inspired people through her actions and her character. It is important to remember the full story, not just the parts that are easy to see." Thomas was struck by the weight of the words. He realized that much of what the public believed about Diana's life was incomplete. The reality, as he was beginning to understand, involved a network of support, careful planning, and dedication from those who served her. Queen Camilla finally spoke, her voice calm yet authoritative. "History must be preserved with respect and accuracy. Some details remain sensitive, but understanding the full picture is important for the legacy of those who shaped our world. Thomas, you are witnessing this because I believe you have the judgment and discretion to carry these lessons forward." Thomas felt a deep sense of responsibility. He understood that being a royal guard was more than maintaining security or following orders. It was about observing, understanding, and honoring the people who had contributed to the history of the palace. As the discussion continued, Gregory revealed a section of letters from advisors who had worked closely with Diana. The letters detailed her thoughtful approach to public engagements, the personal initiatives she had undertaken to help charitable causes, and the care she showed to those around her. Thomas noticed the respect and admiration in the words, a reflection of the positive impact Diana had made. One letter, in particular, caught his attention. It described how Diana had carefully navigated difficult situations, making decisions that balanced public expectations with her personal values. The letter emphasized her courage in maintaining her principles, even when it was challenging. Thomas felt inspired by her determination and the integrity she had shown. Queen Camilla addressed the group again. It is important to remember that Diana's story is not only about challenges or difficulties. It is about the way she lived with compassion, intelligence, and courage. These documents remind us of the careful thought behind every decision and the dedication of those who supported her. Thomas realized that he was witnessing something rare and profound. The Queen and her trusted staff were sharing history in a way that preserved truth while respecting privacy. It was a delicate balance, and he admired the care with which they approached it. As the meeting drew to a close, Queen Camilla spoke directly to Thomas. "You have seen a side of history that few are allowed to witness. Remember that discretion is vital, but also remember the lessons. Integrity, responsibility, and respect for others are the foundation of service." Thomas nodded solemnly. He felt honored to have been part of this gathering, and he understood the importance of carrying forward what he had learned. The palace was more than a residence or a symbol. It was a place where history, loyalty, and thoughtful action intertwined. Later that evening, Thomas walked through the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about Diana's life, the careful attention given to her well-being, and the dedication of those who had served her. He understood that truth was not always simple, and that honoring it required patience, discretion, and courage. As he looked at Diana's portrait one last time before returning to his quarters, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that there were more stories to uncover, more lessons to learn, and more moments where his judgment would be tested. The palace was a place of history, responsibility, and care, and he was now a part of that tradition. Outside, the city of London glowed under the evening sky, unaware of the quiet revelations unfolding within Buckingham Palace. Inside, history was alive, shaped by the actions of those who had served with loyalty and respect. Thomas felt ready to continue his journey, knowing that the truth, when handled with care, could illuminate the past and guide the present. The next morning, Buckingham Palace felt different to Thomas. The usual rhythm of footsteps and whispers seemed quieter, as if the halls themselves were aware that something significant was about to happen. Thomas stood at his post near one of the grand entrances, his uniform immaculate, his mind alert. He could not stop thinking about the revelations from the previous days. The conversations with Robert, Gregory, and Queen Camilla had opened a window into a side of the palace few ever witnessed. Today, he had been asked to accompany Robert to a private chamber. The instructions were clear. Thomas was to observe and assist if necessary, but his primary role was to witness what was about to unfold. Thomas felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. He had learned that within the palace, discretion and patience were essential. As they moved through the corridors, Robert spoke softly. "Thomas, today you will see the culmination of what you have been learning. It is a rare moment, one that very few are permitted to witness. The palace holds many truths, and some must be revealed carefully." Thomas nodded, understanding the gravity of Robert's words. He had grown accustomed to the quiet intensity of the palace, but he knew that today was different. Something extraordinary was about to happen. When they reached the chamber, Thomas noticed that Queen Camilla was already there. She stood near a large table, her expression composed yet serious. On the table lay several folders and documents, each appearing older and more delicate than the last. She looked up as Thomas and Robert entered, her eyes reflecting both authority and trust. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thomas, your presence here is important. You have proven yourself capable of understanding responsibility and discretion. Today, we address truths that have long remained private. It is time to acknowledge certain events with care and honesty." Thomas listened intently, sensing the importance of her words. He realized that this gathering was unlike any other he had witnessed. The room held a quiet tension, filled with history and anticipation. Queen Camilla gestured toward Gregory, who stepped forward carrying a folder with meticulous care. "Gregory has been entrusted with these documents," she explained. "They provide insight into the life of Princess Diana and the efforts taken to preserve her legacy. It is a story that deserves respect and understanding." Thomas watched closely as Gregory opened the folder. Inside were letters, notes, and personal accounts that had been carefully archived over the years. Each document seemed to hold a piece of history, a moment of thoughtfulness, and a reflection of the care taken to protect Diana. Gregory began to speak, his voice calm and deliberate. He shared details about Diana's charitable work, the personal initiatives she undertook, and the way she carefully balanced her public life with private responsibilities. He spoke of the guidance she received from senior staff and the thoughtful decisions made to ensure her well-being. As Thomas listened, he realized that much of the story he had known from the outside was incomplete. There was a depth to Diana's life that went far beyond what had been reported. She had faced challenges with courage and intelligence, and she had inspired those around her through her compassion and dedication. Queen Camilla observed silently, her gaze steady. She seemed to be ensuring that the history was presented with accuracy and care. Thomas understood that her role was not only to guide the present, but also to preserve the integrity of the past. After some time, Gregory paused and spoke more softly. There are also details about events surrounding Diana's departure from public life. Decisions were made with care, ensuring her safety and dignity. It is important to understand that these actions were taken out of respect and responsibility, not secrecy alone. Thomas leaned forward slightly, his curiosity heightened. He sensed that this was the moment when the story would fully come together. The documents, the words, and the quiet tension in the room all pointed toward a revelation that would clarify what had been hidden for so long. Queen Camilla finally spoke, her voice calm but authoritative. "Thomas, what you are about to hear is sensitive, but it is truthful. These documents and accounts reveal the careful planning, thoughtfulness, and protection that surrounded Diana's life. It is a perspective that has rarely been shared, but it is essential for understanding history accurately." Gregory continued, describing how Diana had been supported in her charitable work, how her safety had been carefully managed, and how decisions were made to balance public expectations with personal dignity. Thomas could feel the dedication and care in every word. The palace had not only been a place of ceremony, but also a place of responsibility, where history was preserved and protected. Then, the focus shifted to a letter that Gregory handed to Thomas. It was addressed to senior staff and contained reflections on Diana's impact on those around her. The words highlighted her kindness, intelligence, and the thoughtful way she navigated challenges. Thomas felt a deep sense of admiration as he read the carefully chosen sentences. Diana's legacy was not only about public appearances, but also about the thoughtful influence she had on individuals and the palace as a whole. Queen Camilla's voice broke the silence. "Thomas, you have seen how responsibility, loyalty, and respect were applied in preserving history. Diana's story is more than headlines or speculation. It is a reminder that care and integrity guide the actions of those who serve. Thomas understood now that the palace operated on principles that went beyond rules or protocol. It was about preserving trust, honoring contributions, and ensuring that the stories of the past were respected and remembered accurately. Gregory added, "It is also important to recognize that some information must remain within the palace to protect individuals and maintain respect. Transparency is important, but it must be balanced with discretion." Diana's legacy is strengthened by understanding this balance. Thomas felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had witnessed the careful sharing of history, the responsible handling of truth, and the dedication of those who had served the royal family. The palace was not simply a symbol of tradition. It was a living institution that upheld values of trust, care, and integrity. Queen Camilla looked at Thomas directly. "You have learned a valuable lesson. Service is more than duty. It is about understanding the past, respecting the present, and ensuring that actions today honor those who came before us. You are now part of this tradition, and it is your responsibility to carry it forward." Thomas bowed deeply, feeling both honored and humbled. He understood that his role as a royal guard had evolved. He was no longer only responsible for security or protocol. He was a witness to history, a keeper of knowledge, and a participant in the preservation of truth. As the gathering concluded, Thomas walked through the palace halls once more. The portraits of past monarchs and the photographs lining the walls seemed fuller now, as if the history they represented had become more vivid. He thought of Diana and the care taken to honor her life. He understood the meaning of responsibility, discretion, and respect in a way he had never known before. That evening, as Thomas returned to his quarters, he reflected on everything he had witnessed. The palace had revealed its layers to him: the quiet dedication of staff, the thoughtful guidance of leaders, and the careful preservation of history. He understood that truth was precious and that sharing it required thoughtfulness and integrity. Outside, London sparkled under the night sky, but inside Buckingham Palace, history lived on in quiet moments, careful decisions, and the respect of those entrusted with it. Thomas felt a sense of purpose and pride. He was part of a tradition that upheld truth, honor, and responsibility. As he prepared for rest, Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here. From his first days as a young guard to witnessing the private revelations about Diana, he had grown in understanding and wisdom. He realized that the palace was not just a building, but a place where lives, decisions, and history were intertwined. In the quiet of the night, Thomas knew that he had learned one of the most important lessons of his life. History must be preserved carefully, truth must be handled with respect, and the actions of those who serve leave lasting impacts. Diana's story, now more complete in his understanding, was a testament to courage, integrity, and the thoughtful work of those who guided her. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling a quiet confidence. He knew that the journey ahead would involve further responsibilities and discoveries, but he was ready. He was no longer just a guard. He was a witness, a keeper of history, and someone who understood the value of truth, discretion, and care. Buckingham Palace rested under the starry sky, a symbol of tradition and history, filled with the echoes of those who had shaped it. And Thomas, standing quietly in his place, carried forward the knowledge, respect, and responsibility that would guide him for the rest of his service. The story of Diana, preserved with care and truth, had been shared with him. And in that sharing, Thomas understood that the real power of history lies not in gossip or speculation, but in honesty, responsibility, and the courage to honor those who came before.